close your eyes and let the frost of Eldorath settle softly in your thoughts. Tonight, we embark on a journey into a realm where winter whispers ancient secrets and dragons guard the delicate balance of fire and frost. Feel the hush of snow-covered peaks and the shimmer of auroras stretching across the night sky. As the tale of a miraculous hatchling unfolds, let its quiet strength guide you gently into sleep. Breathe deeply, relax, and step into the magic of this winter's night. The frost arrived early that year, creeping over Eldorath's jagged peaks like an invading army. Snow blanketed the mountains in an eerie hush, muffling the cries of distant winds and silencing the restless stirrings of the land. The dragons of the realm, scattered across ice fields and volcanic hollows, felt it in their bones. This winter carried a different kind of weight, as if the very essence of the season had deepened, grown colder, darker. In the days before the Winterfire festival, the Icefield Cavern lay in solemn anticipation. Its walls, carved from ancient glacial ice, shimmered faintly with an inner light, a glow neither warm nor cold, but alive. Here, in the cavern's hallowed core, rested a clutch of dragon eggs. Each one bore runes etched by time itself, a language that even the wisest dragons could barely comprehend. These eggs, it was said, were the heartbeat of the festival. From their fragile shells would emerge the hatchlings, whose first flames would pierce the winter sky, a spectacle that heralded life's defiance of the cold. But something was wrong this year. The snow fell heavier, burying even the most stubborn peaks. The wind, when it came, carried not its usual howls but whispers, fragments of an ancient melody that twisted and turned, like secrets unraveling in the dark. The dragons of Eldorath gathered in small groups, speaking in hushed tones, their scaled forms illuminated by the faint glow of the cavern. "It's an omen," an elder muttered, her voice cracking like brittle ice. "The snowfall speaks of a turning." "The snow always falls," replied another, younger and braver, though his voice carried a note of doubt. "The eggs will hatch, the flames will rise, and the festival will burn brighter than ever." The elder shook her great head. "All but one." At the heart of the cavern, the eggs lay nestled in their ceremonial cradle, a basin of obsidian and quartz, warmed by the faint embers of past festivals. Most of the eggs trembled with life, their surfaces glowing faintly as their runes pulsed in harmony. But one egg was still. Its shell, instead of the gentle luminescence of its kin, was encased in frost. Its rune was dark, its silence a heavy counterpoint to the rhythmic hum of the others. The younger dragons avoided it, their gazes lingering only for a moment before flickering away. Even the elders kept their distance, wary of the chill that seemed to emanate from its surface. Only one dragon dared to draw near. Kale, the keeper of runes, a dragon whose scales bore the weathered marks of countless winters, crouched low before the egg. His breath formed clouds that froze and fell to the ground like tiny shards of glass. He traced the runes on the egg shell with a talon, his movements slow and deliberate. The rune did not respond, yet Kale felt something, a faint, almost imperceptible hum beneath the frost. It was not life as they knew it, but it was not death either. It was something else. "It stirs," Kale murmured, his voice barely more than a breath. "What stirs?" came a voice from behind him. Another elder had approached, her gaze sharp and questioning. Kale hesitated before answering. Not a hatchling, not yet. Something deeper. He turned his eyes to the elder, their molten gold dimmed by uncertainty. "Do you remember the frostbind curse?" The elder flinched, her tail curling tightly around her body. "That's an old tale, a shadow of fear born from darker times. Old tales are often truth forgotten," Kale replied, his voice heavy with meaning. "And forgotten truths have a way of returning when we least expect them." The elder said nothing, her gaze shifting to the other eggs. Their glow seemed weaker now, their rhythmic hum disrupted by an unseen force. The cavern itself felt colder, the walls shimmering with a brittle fragility. Far above, the night sky remained dark, the stars obscured by swirling snow. The world held its breath, waiting. As the last whispers of day faded into night, the frost on the silent egg thickened, spreading across the cradle like veins of ice. Kale did not move. He could not. Something ancient, something vast, was stirring in the depths of that shell, a presence that whispered of endings and beginnings, of fire and frost intertwined. And in the stillness of the cavern, one thought echoed through Kale's mind, a thought as cold and unyielding as the winter itself. The festival may not survive what comes next. The day of the Winterfire festival arrived, heralded by the faint glow of dawn struggling through a curtain of snow. Dragons from all corners of Eldorath converged on the Ice Veil cavern, their wings stirring the frosted air like whispers of forgotten storms. The snow-muted world was alive with the thrumming of wing beats and low, resonant growls of greetings exchanged in solemn tones. Within the cavern, the hearth of dawn, an immense basin carved from obsidian and veined with silver, waited to receive its sacred charges. One by one, the dragons placed their eggs in its cradle, the surface of the obsidian warming under the weight of each shell. Runes on the basin glimmered faintly as the eggs were set in place, their light growing stronger with each addition. Yet, when the frostbound egg was placed among its glowing brethren, the runes dimmed, as if the ice had sapped their strength. The gathered dragons shifted uneasily, their murmurs echoing faintly in the crystalline chamber. Kale stood at the edge of the hearth, his eyes fixed on the frost-encased egg. It was smaller than the others, its surface unnaturally smooth like polished stone. The frost had thickened, spreading along the edges of the cradle and forming delicate, intricate patterns that resembled ancient glyphs. A young dragon, scales as bright as sunlight on snow, broke the silence. "Why bring it here if it won't hatch?" His voice carried a note of derision, though fear lurked beneath his words. Kale turned his gaze to the youth, his eyes heavy with unspoken truths. The festival belongs to all hatchlings, even those shrouded in mystery. The hearth decides who is worthy, not us. The young dragon fell silent, cowed by the weight of the keeper's words. But the unease in the cavern remained palpable. As the first night of the festival approached, the air inside the cavern grew electric. The eggs began to stir, their shells trembling with the promise of life. The runes carved into their surfaces pulsed in rhythm, a symphony of light and magic. One by one, cracks began to appear, spiderwebbing across the shells. The first hatchling emerged in a burst of green flame, its tiny roar filling the cavern. Its scales shimmered like emeralds, and when it exhaled, a stream of verdant fire lit up the dark. Cheers erupted from the crowd, the sound reverberating through the icy walls. Another followed, then another, each hatchling unleashing a unique flame, blue as the deepest ocean, gold as molten sunlight, violet as twilight's edge. Their fire painted the cavern in colors no mortal could name, a kaleidoscope of brilliance that danced on the reflective walls. But still, the frost-bound egg remained silent. Kale approached it once more, his talons clicking softly against the stone floor. He placed a claw gently on the ice-slick surface, feeling the faint hum beneath the frost. The sound was not the vibrant thrum of life, but something deeper, older. A resonance that seemed to echo from the very bones of the mountain. The festival continued, though the joy was tinged with unease. The hatchlings, now clumsy but eager, took their first flights, their flames carving radiant spirals in the night sky. Above the peaks, the auroras began to form, ribbons of light intertwined with the hatchling's fire. The spectacle was breathtaking, yet it felt incomplete. Dragons whispered among themselves, their voices low and strained. "Why does it not hatch?" one asked. "It is cursed," another replied. "It shouldn't have been brought here." Kale silenced them with a sharp glare, but even he could not shake the growing dread. The frost-bound egg was more than an anomaly. It was a riddle wrapped in silence, and its answer felt closer with every passing moment. As the night deepened, a faint sound broke through the festival's cacophony, a low, pulsing hum that silenced the crowd. It came from the frost-bound egg, its rune now glowing faintly beneath the ice. The temperature in the cavern dropped suddenly, frost creeping along the stone floor, extinguishing the smaller fires left by the hatchlings. The dragons froze, their breath misting in the frigid air. The hum grew louder, vibrating through their chests, filling the cavern with a sound both alien and ancient. The ice on the egg began to crack, shards falling away like shattered glass. Kale stepped back, his voice barely a whisper. It begins. The festival's light dimmed, the brilliant flames of the hatchlings paling in comparison to the strange, otherworldly glow emanating from the frost-bound egg. Whatever lay within was waking, and the air grew heavy with the weight of an unspoken truth. The dragons watched, unable to turn away, as the ice continued to fall and the hum deepened. The festival was no longer a celebration, it was a vigil, and every soul in the cavern could feel it. Something had come to claim its place among them. The frost-bound egg cracked open with a sound unlike any other. A resonant crystalline chime that echoed through the cavern, reverberating in the marrow of every dragon present. The ice encasing the egg shattered, scattering shards like tiny stars that glittered in the faint light of the hearth of dawn. From the fractured shell emerged a hatchling that seemed to belong to another world entirely. Its scales gleamed like liquid silver, each one reflecting not the warmth of the festival's light, but the cold, unyielding brilliance of the moon. Frost clung to its claws, spreading in delicate fractals across the obsidian basin where it had emerged. Its wings, still wet and folded against its sides, shimmered with an iridescent hue that shifted and changed as if the colours themselves were uncertain of their place. The hatchling lifted its head and opened its eyes unlike any seen before. They burned not with fire but with an eerie pale luminescence, as if they held the memory of every winter storm that had ever swept across the peaks of Eldorath. A collective shiver ran through the gathering, the dragons pressing closer together as though seeking warmth from one another. The hatchling did not roar or cry. Instead, it breathed out a long, slow exhalation. From its tiny maw came not fire, but a stream of crystalline shards, each one spinning and catching the dim light before dissolving into the air. The temperature in the cavern plummeted, the frost spreading rapidly along the floor, climbing the walls and extinguishing the remaining flames left by the other hatchlings. A heavy silence fell, broken only by the sound of the young dragon's breath. A sound like the wind howling through icy chasms. The other hatchlings, once lively and playful, cowered, their flames flickering weakly. Even the elders, whose scales had withstood centuries of storms, recoiled instinctively. Kale was the only one who moved, stepping forward with measured deliberation. He lowered his great head to the hatchling's level, his breath misting in the frigid air. The silence between them stretched thin, taut as a wire, before Kale finally spoke. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that carried both curiosity and caution. The hatchling blinked slowly, its gaze meeting Kale's without fear. Though it did not speak, its eyes seemed to hold an answer, an ancient awareness that sent a chill through the elder dragon. Kale felt a sudden and inexplicable certainty. This was no ordinary hatchling. It was a being of frost and silence, a creature born not to ignite the sky, but to reshape it. Behind Kale, the whispers began. "It's cursed!" someone hissed, their voice sharp and trembling. "This is the Frostbine curse!" another cried. "It will end the festival! It will end us all!" The younger dragons stepped back, their tails curling protectively around the smaller hatchlings. Even the elders shifted uneasily, their wings twitching as though readying for flight. The air grew thick with unease, the tension mounting as the frost continued to spread, inching closer to the hearth's edge. "Enough!" Kale's voice cut through the whispers like a blade, his golden eyes narrowing as he turned to face the crowd. "This is not a curse. This is something far greater, a sign perhaps, or a lesson we have yet to understand." The elder who had challenged him earlier stepped forward, her gaze dark and unyielding. "A sign of what, Kale? Of doom?" "The hearth grows cold, the flames fade, and the sky will go dark. This creature is not meant for the festival." "And yet it is here," Kale replied, his voice calm but firm. "We cannot deny what has been placed before us." The hatchling, still silent, stretched its wings for the first time. The motion was slow, deliberate and mesmerizing, as though it moved not through air, but through time itself. Tiny shards of ice fell from its wings, sparkling like fragments of stars as they melted into the obsidian basin. Then, as if drawn by an unseen force, the hatchling turned its gaze upward to the cavern's opening where the aurora still flickered faintly. It spread its wings fully now, their translucent edges catching the light and scattering it in a cascade of colors that seemed impossibly cold yet achingly beautiful. Without warning, the hatchling leapt into the air, its movements fluid and ethereal. It climbed higher, its silver form vanishing into the swirling snow. The dragons watched in silence, their eyes following its ascent. The festival's lights dimmed further, leaving the cavern bathed in an otherworldly glow. Kale stood at the hearth's edge, his gaze fixed on the sky. "The Winterfire festival has not ended," he said softly, though his words carried to every dragon in the cavern. "It has only just begun." And as the hatchling disappeared into the dark, the snow outside began to fall in glittering spirals, as if the sky itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The hatchling vanished into the darkened sky, a fleeting flash of silver lost amid the swirling snow. Below, in the Icefell cavern, the silence was as heavy as the frost now coating the obsidian basin of the hearth. The gathered dragons exchanged glances filled with uncertainty and fear. The glow of the auroras above flickered, their once vibrant hues dimmed to pale ribbons that swayed uneasily, as if caught in a battle between flame and frost. Kale remained motionless, his gaze fixed on the cavern's opening, where the hatchling had disappeared. He knew better than to speak, for his words would hold no comfort. The frostbound hatchling had unsettled the delicate balance of the Winterfire festival, and whatever followed would decide not just the night's fate, but perhaps the fate of Eldorath itself. As the last of the whispers faded, the cavern trembled. A low rumble rolled through the earth, subtle at first, but growing louder, more insistent. Frost crawled farther along the cavern walls, spreading like veins of ice. Above, the sky shifted. The auroras twisted into strange, jagged shapes, their colours deepening into shades of blue and silver, as if the heavens were mirroring the frostbound hatchling's arrival. "It's happening!" A voice broke the uneasy quiet. A young dragon, his words trembling with awe and fear. The hatchlings still in the hearth huddled together, their once bright flames now reduced to faint glimmers. The elder dragons stood tall, their wings partially unfurled, ready to defend, though against what none could say. The frostbind curse was more than a legend now. It was alive, its cold tendrils reaching into the hearts of even the bravest souls. From the cavern's mouth came a sound, faint and distant at first, but growing steadily louder. It was the hatchling's cry, a single, haunting note that carried with it a weight of sorrow and power. The sound pierced through the storm outside, cutting into the cavern like a blade. Cale flinched, his ancient heart aching with an emotion he couldn't name. Then, a burst of light. The dragons turned their eyes skyward as the frostbound hatchling reappeared, its silver form illuminated by a cascade of crystalline shards that rained down around it. These were no ordinary shards. They caught the aurora's dim light and refracted it, creating a kaleidoscope of colours so vivid they seemed to burn the air. The shards fell gently at first, but soon the storm intensified, the sky erupting into a dazzling display of frost and fire interwoven. The elder who had challenged Cale stepped forward, her voice sharp and commanding. "This cannot continue. If it spreads, it will freeze the hearth and extinguish the fire forever." Cale turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "The fire is not gone. It is merely changing." "Changing," she hissed. "This hatchling threatens everything we hold sacred. The Winterfire festival is built on flame, not frost." Cale's gaze returned to the hatchling, now circling high above the cavern. Perhaps flame and frost are not so different after all. As if in response to his words, the hatchling let out another cry, and the frost that had coated the cavern began to shift. The ice on the hearth glowed faintly, its surface rippling like water. The hatchlings within stirred, their flames reigniting one by one, though their colours were no longer pure. Each fire now shimmered with threads of silver and blue, a fusion of heat and cold. The elder dragons gasped, their eyes widening as the frost spread once more, but this time it did not smother. It wove itself into the light of the auroras above, enhancing their brilliance. The cavern was no longer cold, but alive with an energy that defied explanation. Above them, the frostbound hatchling spiraled higher, its wings catching the light of the auroras. It opened its maw and unleashed a stream of crystalline shards that joined the ribbons of color, transforming the sky into a living tapestry. The once muted auroras now blazed with unimaginable brilliance, their hues entwined with the strange, otherworldly light of the hatchling's frost. Kale stepped forward, his voice steady and strong. "This is not destruction," he said, addressing the gathered dragons. "This is creation. The hatchling has brought balance, a merging of what we feared and what we celebrated." The elder who had challenged him hesitated, her gaze shifting between the transformed sky and the frostbound hatchling. Finally she nodded, her wings lowering in a gesture of reluctant acceptance. As the night wore on, the festival took on a new life. The hatchling's flames danced alongside the frost, their combined light filling the sky with a beauty that left even the most skeptical dragons awestruck. For the first time in centuries, the Winterfire festival became something more than a celebration of flame. It became a symphony of opposites, a testament to the power of unity. The frostbound hatchling descended slowly, its wings folding neatly as it returned to the hearth. It curled into a tight circle, its silver scales shimmering faintly as the frost around it began to melt. The dragons watched in silence, their hearts heavy with the weight of what they had witnessed. Kale spoke one final time, his voice echoing through the cavern. The frostbind curse was never a curse. It was a gift, a reminder that even in the coldest winters, there is a fire waiting to be kindled. And as the festival's lights continued to blaze across the heavens, the frostbound hatchling closed its eyes, its breath slow and steady, a new legend born from the shards of the old. The frostbound hatchling slept at the heart of the Hearth of Dawn, its silver scales shimmering faintly in the ambient glow of the transformed cavern. The other hatchlings, emboldened by its presence, resumed their playful flights, leaving trails of mingled flame and frost that wove themselves into delicate patterns against the darkened stone walls. Yet, despite the newfound harmony within the cavern, the elder dragons remained still, their gazes fixed on the sky outside. Above the mountains of Eldorath, the auroras had taken on a life of their own. No longer a quiet dance of muted colors, they writhed and surged like rivers of molten light, their hues deep and unnatural, blues as cold as despair, silvers that shone like sharp-edged blades, and reds that smoldered like embers on the verge of collapse. The frostbound hatchling's cry had awakened something vast and unknowable in the heavens, and its presence was both beautiful and terrifying. Kale stood near the hearth, his ancient form silhouetted against the riot of light spilling into the cavern. His golden eyes, weathered by countless winters, now carried a strange gleam, a mix of awe, understanding and unease. "Kale!" a voice called, low and strained. It was the elder who had opposed him earlier, her scales dim in the shifting light. She stepped closer, her tail dragging against the frost-slick floor. "This balance you speak of, it is unnatural. The auroras writhe as though alive, and the sky burns not with fire, but with something darker." Kale turned to her, his voice a deep rumble. "What we call unnatural is often nature's answer to a question we have long forgotten to ask." "And what question is that?" she pressed, her tone sharp, almost desperate. Kale gestured to the sleeping hatchling. "The question of change, of what lies beyond the traditions we hold so dear. The frostbind hatchling has shown us a truth we feared to face. The fire we cherish is not eternal. It must evolve, or it will perish." As the elder opened her mouth to reply, the ground trembled again, this time more violently. Cracks appeared in the icy walls of the cavern, releasing streams of cold air that spiraled upwards like ghostly tendrils. The light of the auroras intensified, spilling into the cavern in bursts of radiant energy. The hatchlings screeched in alarm, their flames flickering uncertainly as the frost along the hearth began to stir. And then it happened. The frost-bound hatchling stirred, lifting its head as if summoned by the pulse of the earth. Its silver eyes opened, glowing brighter than before, and it released a breath that sent a stream of crystalline shards spiraling into the air. The shards hovered for a moment, then shattered into 1,000 points of light, their brilliance rivaling the stars. The cavern walls began to shift. Where the ice had once crept, now it melted, revealing veins of luminous quartz that glowed with an inner fire. The hearth itself responded, the obsidian basin radiating warmth that chased away the chill. The dragon stared in silence as the frost and flame intermingled, creating a light neither could produce alone. The hatchling spread its wings and leapt into the air, its flight slow and deliberate. The hatchling spread its wings and leapt into the air, its flight slow and deliberate. It ascended toward the cavern's opening, its silver form cutting through the chaos of the auroras. Above, the sky erupted in a symphony of color and motion. The auroras coiled and uncoiled like living things, their hues deepening as the hatchling climbed higher, its path leaving a shimmering trail of frost and light in its wake. As the hatchling reached the heavens, it let out a cry that pierced through the tumult. A sound that was neither roar nor song, but something in between. A resonance that vibrated in the marrow of every dragon. The auroras responded, their chaotic movement stilled, and the colors softened, merging into one another in a way that was both harmonious and breathtaking. And then, the miracle. The hatchling unleashed its frost in a great arc across the sky, but instead of smothering the light, it amplified it. The shards refracted the auroras, casting their brilliance far beyond the peaks of Eldorath. the once muted greens, blues, and golds of the festival became a radiant tapestry that stretched across the heavens, visible to every corner of the realm. Below, the dragons stood in awe, their gazes fixed on the transformed sky. The elders bowed their heads in reverence, and even the smallest hatchlings ceased their playful flights, their tiny flames flickering gently in the still air. For the first time in memory, the Winterfire festival was not bound to the cavern. It belonged to the world. Kale turned to the gathered dragons, his voice carrying the weight of prophecy. This is the gift of the frostbind hatchling. It is not fire or frost alone that sustains us, but their union. The balance that reminds us we are part of something greater. As the auroras wove their final patterns, and the frostbound hatchling descended quietly to the hearth, the festival came to its end. The dragons departed, their hearts heavy with wonder and awe, each carrying a shard of the miracle they had witnessed. The frostbind hatchling curled into the hearth once more, its silver scales dimming as it drifted into a peaceful sleep. Kale watched over it, his breath misting in the cool air. He whispered softly, his words meant for the hatchling alone. You have given us more than light. You have given us hope. And outside, the sky still burned, not with the fire of dragons, but with the miracle of their unity.